So that's what we're going to be doing now. I'm going to take you through a couple of these different story patterns. So I like this idea that, there's different very basic patterns that you can use and reuse as a way of telling stories. And we like to teach these 4 patterns plus an underlying foundation of the ability to spot stories. So let me just take you quickly through these patterns. We're not going to be able to go through all of them today, but I'll show you a couple. The first one is a connection story. So a connection story is when you meet people for the first time, a seller needs to be able to make a very quick connection and build rapport. And one of the best ways to do that is to share a story, right? I had to go and meet a CEO of a company called Bayer, a pharmaceutical company. And you do what you normally do. I went onto LinkedIn and I had a look at the CEO's profile. And she had just arrived in Australia and she was from the USA. And I noticed that she was originally from South Carolina, right? Now, it turns out I was born in South Carolina, right? I know, I've got an Australian accent, but, way back when, I was born in South Carolina. And so when I walked in the door, I said, "Oh, I hear you're from South Carolina. I was born there." And she said, "How did you end up here in Australia?" And what did I do? I told a story. Next thing you know, we were like connected, like we were old buddies that, had known each other for years. And, this is this idea of finding a connection story. And we'll talk a little bit about, what are some of the key characteristics of good connection stories, okay? The second one is about changing people's minds. Now, it turns out that the worst strategy you can take to change someone's mind is to argue with them, to give them a better argument. And this is what we do all the time in organisations. We think, okay, they're thinking this way, I need to get them thinking this way, I'm going to give them a clever argument that has all this data and facts and figures. Well, it turns out the more you do that, the more they dig their heels in. I think we all have the confirmation bias, right? So the confirmation bias says that when someone provides an argument and we disagree with that argument, we will find everything in what they say to make it sound like the thing you want to support, right? They won't shift. But it turns out that if you can share a story or two that gives them a different perspective, they won't flip straight away. It's not like they'll just hear your story and all of a sudden their perspective changes, but they listen to you. They can hear it. And it's because there's a difference in how we communicate when you share a story versus opinion, okay? So think about it. If someone gives you an opinion, they're pushing the opinion at you. What do we do in return when someone pushes something at you? You tend to push back, right? You tend to, start to fight with them. However, when someone shares a story, the audience just pulls the story in. They go, "Really? Did that happen? Oh, that's really interesting. What happens next?" So they might be receiving the exact same information, but because it's a pull strategy, they get to hear things that they don't hear when it's a push strategy. See the difference? So what we're trying to do with the influence story is to make sure you're getting the story out before you get your opinion out, okay? The third one here is the success stories, and these are really just for large organisations. For example, we're working with SAP at the moment, and they have lots and lots of case studies, right? They love case studies. And the case studies are written in the format of, this is the problem, here's the solution, this is the end result that we got from that. And in that sort of case study, it's told from the perspective of what an organisation did for another organisation. Well, it turns out humans don't really care. We want to know what a person did for another person, right? We need to bring it down to that human level. And this is what the success story pattern is all about. How do you tell the story about how a CIO felt before they got the solution, and then how they felt, and see how it's all to do with emotion, how they felt after they got the solution, so that when you're a salesperson telling that to another CIO, the CIO's going, "I feel that way. And you know what? I would love to feel like that." And it turns out our decisions are driven by emotion. On the front here, you might be wondering, why do we have an elephant? Why an elephant on the front of a storytelling program? Well, there's this lovely metaphor that was developed a number of years ago by a couple of researchers who sort of said, well, if you're trying to affect change, it's a bit like having a mahout sitting on an elephant, right? The mahout represents the rational and logical. The mahout gives the instructions to the elephant. We're going to go right, we're going to go left, straight ahead. But it's the elephant that represents the emotion, right? And of course, the elephant is much bigger. And if the elephant decides to go into the jungle, there's actually nothing the mahout can do about it. So if you're not talking to the elephant as well as talking to the mahout, now we all talk to the mahout, but we need to talk to the elephant, right? And that's what storytelling allows us to do. Start to get that emotion connection happening rather than just the logical, rational going on in organisations, which we're great at. We don't need any more expertise in that space. And then the big pattern out here, and we'll talk about this, is the clarity pattern. The clarity pattern is really good for answering the question why. Why are we doing this versus that? Okay, so they're the main patterns, but sitting below all of that is just this idea of spotting an oral story, and we'll explore that in a minute. So, sales is a process. You're building rapport, you're establishing credibility, you're demonstrating value, you're asking for the sale, and then the story patterns just fit in, underneath each one. So, building rapport, you're using the connection story and success stories. Establishing credibility, you're using connection stories and the success stories. Demonstrating value, it's clarity, influence, success. And then asking for the sale, it's the influence story. We'll look at just these two here, the connection story and the clarity story. But here's the thing, just an important tip in doing any of this work. And I have to really work hard sometimes to help my sellers not fall into this trap, right? And the trap is this: never mention the S word, right? Now, what I mean by that, let's take two scenarios. Imagine you're a senior leader in an organisation, you've got all your employees in front of you, and you start your presentation by saying, guys, I just want to start this session with a story. I want to tell you a story. What's your immediate gut feeling when a senior leader stands in front of you and says that? In a lot of organisations, when I ask them that, they go, do we have time for a story? This is business. Why are we listening to a story? They roll their eyes, they fidget around. They hate it. They hate the idea of being told a story. Let's rewind this, okay? Play it again. This time the leader stands there and says, something really important happened a couple of weeks ago I want to share with you. Now what are you thinking? Well, people go, I want to hear what happened a couple of weeks ago. You still tell a story, but you never use the S word. You never say the word story. So that's probably the one of the little simple things. We sometimes fall in love with this idea of storytelling. We're saying, the story of this and the story of that and our story, and we'll put a box around something and say, these are our stories. And really, all you're doing is falling into that same trap of, saying, this is a story, you need to listen to it. Remember, a good storytelling is invisible, right? People should just be thinking to themselves, what happens next? What happens next? That's the urge that you want to generate.